of what we think is owed to us rather than what we owe to others. We need to keep in mind that while all of us must get forgiveness, none of us deserve forgiveness. The moment we start acting like we deserve it is the very moment that we are likely to lose it. Assumptions about forgiveness. Hopefully, you'll be able to use this as another tool in your bag when you deal with people who need to be forgiven or who need to forgive. And it will always come down to this. Regardless of the nature of the conflict, somewhere it's always going to be forgiveness. Now, forgiveness may not be difficult if it's only a very slight problem. But the deeper the problem, the more you will have to deal with this challenge of forgiveness. The people that you deal with, it may impinge upon their very soul's salvation. So take it very seriously and make sure you are thorough. We always speak the truth in love, so even dealing with people who have caused problems, who are in conflict, or who have disrupted their own family life, they may have done some things that are almost unthinkable. So you'll have to deal with some messy situations. You'll have to deal with people's lives. But always remember that it is their eternity at stake. Not just peace at the moment. Not just resolving the conflict that's hurting a department in the church or hurting a family in the church or hurting the whole church at large. But you are dealing with a person's eternal soul. And so do it prayerfully, carefully, lovingly, and God will help you. So that's the conclusion of what I had to speak to you today. If there's any questions, if not, I will turn it back over to Brother Kelly.
I've just had a question come in.
Okay.
It's from Irene Tabinda. She says, if someone has caused you deep hurt, how do you know you've truly forgiven them when you still have painful memories of the situation?
It comes back to your actions. Your feelings and your memories they have a life of their own. And it's very difficult to say, I will not think about this. It's like the person that was snapping their fingers on the street corner. And somebody asked, why are you snapping your fingers? I said, I'm keeping the pink elephants away. Well, why are you, does it work? Well, you don't see any pink elephants, do you? I'm snapping my fingers. So what is that? The very thing you say I'm not going to think about is what you think about. Mm-hmm. So we cannot control that, but we can control our actions. And my contention is that if you continue to act in a responsible way, if you continue to act righteously and godly, then your feelings will eventually follow your actions. You cannot work with a person. You cannot, and especially you cannot pray for a person sincerely for their welfare and not have your feelings changed or affected, impacted in some way. So when you have a feeling that you can't dismiss, that you can't get rid of, don't go after the feeling, go after the action. Make sure your actions are right, and then your feelings will take care of themselves. That's the best answer. I don't know any other way that a person can, other than a frontal lobotomy. I don't know how you're going to get rid of your feelings.
Yeah, adding to that question as well, so it would be a responsible way, just try to be away from the person, but being nice to that person at the same time, but just keeping the distance between it.
That may be necessary, and all depends on the kind of relationship. And husband and wife, that might be difficult, but a person, a fellow Christian, fellow worker in the church or in the workplace or student in school or whatever, you might be able to, then it comes down to agree to disagree. That it's better for you, because each of you may not be the best influence on each other. So it's best, yes, in those situations to be separate from each other. There's nothing wrong with that. But I do think that if it continues to incite bitterness or jealousy or anger or a desire for retaliation, then that's a problem. And I think that needs to be taken to the Lord in prayer. But there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, we're just not going to have a whole lot to do with each other and be in each other's company very much from this point on. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. Yes?
How do you deal with this situation whereby maybe you have a church member, it's a family, and it's a couple, and one partner, the wife or husband, is not there? Like they're not saying we are divorcing, but maybe they are away. They just go and come back whenever they want, and they don't communicate. And now you are with one person who is there, and that person needs your guidance and on how to deal with that situation. And also, you're not hearing from the other person. You only hear from one side of the story, and it seems like the other person made the decision long time ago, and the other one is being left there, believing in marriage, hating divorce, but it's like there's no marriage.
Well, I understand that. You have to minister to the person who's present. If the other person has left and is not communicating, whatever, then you really can't do anything. You can't even deal with the source of the conflict, really. So you can minister to the person of their spiritual needs and so forth, but sometimes you have to wait until the circumstances come around to make the real conflict, to address that, to do something about it. And you may not be able to do that. It could take sometimes years before that happens. But in the meantime, counsel with the person who has been done wrong, not to allow bitterness to come in. They can't do anything about that other person, but they do not have to allow bitterness or anger or resentment or retaliation to overwhelm them, because that will destroy them. You see, bitterness is not something that destroys the other person. It's like saying, I am going to hurt you, or I'm going to hurt myself because I hate you. You know, the other person is not affected. Forgiveness is for yourself as well as for the other person. Forgiveness releases you from the burden of carrying around offense. So my advice is to, in those situations, you have to wait until the circumstances develop to a point where you can do something about it. Otherwise, minister to the person who's present to every other spiritual need that they have.
I have another question from Chris Rasalam. It says, is it okay to avoid the person until you know you are ready to forgive, or not talk about the situation until you're ready to confront it?
I think so, but I would do that only if you have consulted with your spiritual authority, your pastor. Then tell them what you're feeling, what you're thinking, so they know what's going on. Because, you know, feelings are very deep, and if a person's not ready to deal with it, they're too emotional. And I've had this happen many times. A person gets up and walks out of my office because they're not ready to deal with something. Doesn't make them a bad person, doesn't make them unwilling or rebellious. It just means that there's something called time, and time has to, they know what they need to do, but they're not ready, can't really address that situation. So I think, yes, you can avoid that person, and you can wait for a while, but I think you need to do it with the supervision of your spiritual authority.
Okay, we've got a question from Sister Miller, pastor's wife at the Leeds Church. It says, how does one manage the following scenario? One sister has grievously offended another sister, but does not acknowledge that she has done anything wrong.
Well, then that's time for I wouldn't call it a confrontation, but certainly a conference to talk to them about it, and you can judge whether or not the emotions are running too high, but that person something needs to happen to deal with that person's emotions first before you can deal with the actual problem. But eventually, you will have to come to the place where it has to be dealt with. And I think that if it's disruptive to the church, then it has to be dealt with sooner rather than later. If it's something that's really not on anybody else's radar, and it's just kind of a private thing that's going on, then you can deal with it a little more, I hate to use the term leisurely, I will say patiently, and allow it to come to a point. And I do think maybe patience is a pretty good way to describe that, because patience is not procrastination. Patience is informed waiting. It is waiting until. It's like the farmer does not go out in March and gather the crops in. No, he patiently, because he knows what planting and growing and reaping is all about. He waits until the season is there for reaping. And sometimes you have to wait for the season to reconcile, comes about. Okay?
I'm sorry, you made a statement, patience can be
It's a good one.
informed.
No, patience is
Is.
informed waiting. In other words, it's not blind,
Right,
just because some people wait impatiently.
yeah. That's me.
But waiting patiently, because you know that at the right time, things are going to develop and you'll be able to handle it.
Very good.
I have a question. Say like someone like close to you, like a family member or something, like continues to hurt you about the same thing, and then they say they're sorry, but eventually they're sorry. Like you can't believe, like when they say I'm sorry, you can't believe it because it just continually happens over and over. And then it gets hard for you to like accept their apology because you just kind of expect them to do the same thing again. Like, how do you deal with it? Just continue? You just like set yourself up to be hurt again, or how do you deal with that?
Well, I mean, you're human, so you can't allow your emotions to, or your feelings to constantly be hurt and be vulnerable. So, yes, it was exactly what you said. You know that it's probably not a sincere apology, and so you take it for what it is, and you don't put all your hopes into that basket. They finally apologize, and then you make commitments on that basis, and then it all falls through. So no, you don't do that. You have to. All of us are given brains to act, and we're given ways to regulate our thoughts and our feelings. And so that's one of the products of a person who is insincere. So what you do is you simply take it for what it's worth, and then you pray about it. You pray that God would help that person to come to a place where they can sincerely apologize and change their behavior. But until that happens, for example, let me just say this, and maybe I'm going a little bit out on a limb to say this, but I do not believe in divorce. Do I believe that a woman should stay in a relationship that she is going to be murdered, that the only way to get out of that relationship is in a body bag. I don't think that she should necessarily divorce, but you should be, our basic instinct is survival. And so if you're in danger of losing your life, then, don't stay around and flirt with danger. So yes, we do have to make some kind of adjustments to our behavior and to our reaction. So if we are around a dangerous situation or around a potentially hurtful situation, we adjust our emotions to deal with that. And then, as I said, you pray for that person and pray that God would help them to come to a place to recognize that they're not being sincere. And beyond that, there's nothing you can do, because that person is going to is answerable and accountable to God for his or her behavior. Okay,
Amen.
Thank you so much.
Yes.
you're very welcome. Thank you. One more question. About pardon?
When we talk about someone who's done the aggression
Yes.
and the offence and the offended, how much, as a counsellor, as a spiritual leader, do you consult with them individually and try and resolve the issue? How much do you bring them together to try and resolve the issue?
Well, I think, again, I think you talk to them personally. Matthew 18:15. You go to that person alone and talk with them to see where this whole issue stands. If it's an incendiary issue, a volatile issue that could just really break into all kinds of problems, then you need to wait until it can be resolved. The worst thing you can do is take somebody who is in no mood to reconcile and put them in the same room with a person that they consider their enemy, because you're going to have a fight in your hands, and it's not going to do any good. In fact, it would be counterproductive to the eventual reconciliation. So you have to wait and deal with a person who has the problem, or has the issue, who has the aggression, and work with them until they can, be calm enough and composed enough to have a productive meeting with the other person. But it does have to come to that eventually. But I think, you have to wait until that can be done. Okay. Brother Kelly, bless you.
Thank you.